Hi, or in the words of that other car presenter,
hey, how you doing?
So a few months ago we had this strange hippie with a regional accent do a review of the Citroen C3 for us. He quite liked it. We also thought it was
all a bit too faddy and something that will very soon look a bit embarrassing for a grown-up to have. Kind of like, this will help us concentrate while I think of something faddy and embarrassing.
So today we're looking at this version, which is very similar but a bit fatter. This then is the Aircross, not just something you'd see Scandinavian people doing at 6 AM on Transworld Sport on Channel 4 in the 90s. That was a long reference, wasn't it?
On Transworld Sport, we bring you the top sports stories from around the world.
It also means that this is a crossover, aren't they all? So this effectively replaces the C3 Picasso, which was a small MPV. And it does that because, and Citroen admits this itself, nobody buys MPVs anymore. Everybody wants an SUV-shaped car. According to the SMMT, they're the people who do all the car statistics, 1 in 5 new cars now sold is a crossover. They call them a dual-purpose vehicle. Whereas only 5 years ago, it was 1 in 10. But the purpose of this segment is that with a compact crossover SUV, you get the feel of something that's quite good fun to drive, something that's not like an MPV. Citroen might have designed it with deference to market tastes by making it look less slab-sided and more like a little SUV, but to all intents and purposes, it's the same car as the Picasso was, and that's most obvious in the way it behaves on the road. It's fundamentally comfortable because it's quite softly sprung, but then what that means is that it wobbles about a lot. If you go over a pothole in this, it sort of judders the whole cabin left and right. It just rolls loads when you're cornering and you cannot feel what's going on underneath you at all. Now actually that doesn't really matter because who buys a C3 Aircross and gives a monkeys about what a corner's like? But what this does is it just feels like the Citroen C3 Picasso did. It feels like a tall, thin, wobbly MPV. But the advantage of that is that the C3 Aircross is probably the most practical of the small SUVs on the market. So it has a slightly bigger boot than the C3 Picasso had, and actually a bigger boot than its rivals. Although you'll notice if we jumble the figures around a bit that the maximum boot space is on the small side, strangely. The door pockets are quite deep, which is nice, but the glove box is French, which means that half of it's already full of circuitry before you've put anything into it. Another thing the C3 Aircross has going for it is impressive modularity. The rear bench slides so that you can choose whether you want more cabin space or more boot space. The front seat folds completely flat, and roof rails are standard. That's the international sign for roof rails. Is that much of that modularity you have to pay for, like the sliding rear bench is top spec only, for example, and without that feature, the boot volume officially drops to 410. Safety is 5-star, whichever version you buy though. Engines then. Your choices are a 1.6 litre diesel with either 100 or 120 horsepower, and a triumvirate of 1.2 litre 3-cylinder petrols. As usual, the diesels offer excellent on-paper economy, but we'd actually recommend going for the petrol stuff, especially if you're just going around the doors. It only starts to really come undone when you start going quicker. So this 3-cylinder petrol engine, this is the 130 horsepower one, it's pretty quick, but it has less of a 3-cylinder growl and more of a 4-cylinder diesel racket about it. The other thing I would say is that Citroen still cannot get a driving position right, and it's really annoying. It's not like a small car where the limits of physical space mean that the driving position has to be a bit compromised. There's masses of space in here, but it's still got that horrible French driving position where you're sat sort of too close to the pedals are cramped, there's no rest for your clutch foot, so when you lift your foot up to try and get on the clutch, it kind of catches the edge of your shoe. Again, that sounds like a small, insignificant thing, but it's indicative of the details that Citroen never gets right with its driving positions. Even more so because these seats are flat and comfortable. So if they just sort the driving position out a little bit, make a bit more space in the pedal box, put the seat a little bit lower, give the steering wheel a little bit more adjustment, then it would improve this car tenfold, well not tenfold, but it would improve this car a lot. Gear change is as light, read sloppy as you would expect for a Citroen. In fact, all the controls are as light as you would expect. And
Again, I said this with a C3, if you fit into this car and you happen to find that you can get a comfortable driving position and you don't wear size 12 shoes like I do, then you'll probably find this really nice, comfortable, pleasant car, especially at low speeds.
Going back to the whole SUV versus MPV thing, this really is the former in name only. There are no four-wheel drive versions, although if you want to pay a bit, you can get a fancy next level traction control system that sort of behaves appropriately depending on what sort of surface you're on.
Of course, the advantage of a car like this is that you sit high and you get good visibility. That's true, you kind of feel tall and safe in here, although it does seem like the front of the bonnet is quite a distance away from you for a small car, and rear visibility is compromised if you've got these weird Venetian blind stickers. You could probably just peel them off.
And also, like the normal C3, much of the joie de vivre of this car comes on the options list. Like, the basic spec sheet of the car is okay. You can see some of the highlights here, but there's no contrasting paint, the cabin is very grey, and there's no touchy touchscreen. Although, having said that, using the touchy touchscreen doesn't really give you a whole lot of joie de vivre either.
Because, for example, there's no shortcut buttons, so if you want to change the temperature and you look at the sat-nav, you have to come out of the sat-nav screen to do that. It seems like they put more thought into the back part of it than they did the front part.
So, as usual, for a TV spec car, you're looking at something that's mid-range and with a couple of options on it, which means you're probably looking to spend in the 16 to 17 grand range for maximum C3 Aircross. All I'm saying is that if you want to get the best out of your Aircross, you're probably going to have to spend a bit more than you maybe thought you were going to spend. And the residuals will probably be, well, quite poor, and that will affect how much you pay monthly. And yet, we still like the C3 Aircross. There's something enjoyable about it, and it's probably to do with the fact that it's very clearly different to the rest of the small crossover set. A set that's largely pretty average and pretty boring.
It's easy to find fault with. It's not the greatest to drive. It has some issues with intuitiveness in the cabin, but it's a lot more practical than most compact SUVs are, and I think there's a lot of people who will enjoy its softness, and combined with its quirky looks inside and out, will probably find this a pretty appealing ownership experience.
So there you go, C3 Aircross. Thanks for watching, we appreciate your time, and hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. Bye.
Another detail in here, but the cup holders are really small and shallow and square shaped. Like, who has a square cup? Like, I mean, they probably work fine, but also